On my 48th birthday, my wife handed me a card that said, "Thanks for ruining everything," while my kids laughed. She didn't know that in exactly 30 days, I was going to vanish, taking her entire world with me. I turned 48 the day the world finally tilted on its axis and showed me exactly where I stood. Not that I was expecting some grand spectacle. No balloons, no colorful confetti raining from the ceiling, no heartfelt speeches. I've never been that guy. My name is Caleb, and I've spent nearly half a century being the man who fades into the background, the human equivalent of beige wallpaper. I never made a fuss about my own birthday, but God, I made sure I was there for everyone else's. I was the one who stayed up until 2 a.m. assembling the impossible toy sets. I was the one who made the frantic midnight grocery runs for boxed cake mix and frosting because my daughter Emily suddenly remembered she needed 3 dozen cupcakes for a class bake sale the next morning. I thought that's what love was. I thought being a good man, a provider, a husband, a father, meant being the silent, unyielding foundation. I let myself be worn down like a jagged stone in a relentless river, thinking that losing my edges for the sake of their comfort was a noble sacrifice. I didn't realize that when you let people walk all over you for 2 decades, they eventually forget you're even a person. They just start treating you like the floor. I've been married to Dana for 23 years. Back in college, she was the sun. This radiant, loud, chaotic force of nature who could light up a room with a single sharp-witted joke. I was the anchor. I was the guy with the spreadsheets, the one who remembered to pay the rent 3 days early and always carried a spare sweater in the car because I knew she'd get cold. I thought we balanced each other out. Looking back through the haze of 2 decades, I realized I wasn't her partner. I was just the shore she occasionally crashed against before sailing off to wherever she pleased. Then there are the kids. Jake is 20 now, and he's always been a bit of a chameleon, shifting his personality to match his mother's moods, desperate for her approval. Emily, my 17-year-old, is a different breed entirely. She's brilliant, but she's a firecracker with a fuse that's always burning. She has this biting, surgical sarcasm that can find a person's deepest insecurity and exploit it in seconds. I used to joke that Jake got Dana's charm and Emily got her claws, but lately the scratching has started to feel like carving. They both inherited Dana's terrifying ability to gaslight a situation, to twist the narrative of a memory until you start to wonder if you're actually losing your mind. Dana called it wit. I called it a slow-acting poison, though I didn't have the courage to say that out loud. We lived the dream in a 2-story colonial in the suburbs. I did the soul-crushing commute into the city every day, working as a project manager at a manufacturing firm. It was stable, gray, and utterly thankless, but it paid for the lifestyle Dana wanted. She started an interior design business a decade ago, which mostly meant our house became a revolving door of high-end furniture and mood boards. Our life became performative. I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a prop. My routines, my quiet nature, even the way I drank my coffee became a punchline. I'd walk into the kitchen and the room would go silent for a heartbeat, followed by a snicker and someone whispering, "Oh look, speak of the spreadsheet." Dana loved calling me Mr. Predictable. The kids picked it up like a fun new game. It was harmless banter, they said, but banter isn't supposed to make you bleed. Last Christmas was the turning point I should have noticed. Dana posted a video of me trying to carve the turkey. I was struggling with the knife, sweating, while the 3 of them stood in the background wearing matching, ridiculous, ugly sweaters they'd ordered without telling me. I was the only one in a regular shirt, looking like an outsider in my own home. "Dad didn't get the memo," Dana chirped to the camera, laughing until she turned red. The video got hundreds of likes. "Poor guy," the comments read. "Classic Caleb. He looks so confused. LOL. I stood there in the garage later that night, scrolling through those comments, feeling a hollow, cold ache in my chest that no amount of family time could warm. It wasn't about a sweater. It was about the realization that I was the designated butt of the joke in a play I never signed up for. So when my 48th birthday arrived, I tried to kill the hope in my heart, but a small, pathetic part of me still wanted something real. Maybe a handwritten card from Emily like the ones she made when she was 6. Maybe a genuine, "Thanks, Dad," from Jake. Just a moment where I wasn't a punchline. We were gathered in the dining room. The air smelled of Dana's famous lemon cake. My favorite, or so I thought. Jake was there with his girlfriend, Leia, who spent the evening staring at her cuticles and avoiding my gaze as if I were a ghost. Emily was hunched over her phone, the blue light reflecting in her bored eyes. I sat there, smiling until my face ached, making the kind of small talk that feels like chewing glass. Then, Dana leaned forward, a predatory, excited grin stretching across her face. She slid a card across the table. "Open it, Caleb," she said, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We all worked on it together." My heart did a stupid, hopeful little flutter. Maybe this was it. Maybe they finally saw me. I picked up the card. The front featured a crude cartoon of a man drowning in a sea of folders and paperwork. I opened it. Inside, written in a bold, aggressive red marker that felt like a scream, were 5 words that shattered 23 years of silence. "Thanks for ruining everything. Happy birthday, Dad." The table was silent, except for the faint, muffled sound of their suppressed giggles. I looked up, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my family. I saw 3 strangers who had spent years feeding off my soul, and I realized the cake in front of me tasted like nothing but ash. The laughter didn't just fill the room. It felt like it was bouncing off the walls, vibrating in my teeth, and mocking the very air I breathed. Below that cruel red sentence, someone, likely Emily, with her practiced, cynical hand, had sketched a tiny, detailed tombstone. Etched onto the cartoon granite were the words, R.I.P. Spontaneity. They all burst out laughing at once, a synchronized explosion of mirth that felt like a physical blow to my chest. Dana was doubled over, her body shaking as she leaned her weight into Jake's shoulder for support, her eyes watering. "We figured it was finally time to give you some honest feedback, Caleb," she managed to wheeze out between giggles, her face flushed with the thrill of the prank. "Think of it as constructive criticism, the special birthday edition." Jake snorted, a sharp, derisive sound that cut through my remaining defenses. "Seriously though, Dad, it's like you're actually allergic to fun. It's a medical marvel at this point." Emily didn't even bother to look up from her screen, her thumbs flying across the glass as she tossed her jagged contribution into the air. "Honestly, we should just get him a leather-bound planner for his birthday so he can officially schedule his midlife crisis. God forbid he does something without a spreadsheet." The room began to tilt, the edges of my vision blurring until I felt like I was submerged under 10 feet of icy water, watching my life play out from a vast, unreachable distance. My smile didn't falter. It couldn't. It was frozen into a brittle, automatic mask. I heard a sound come out of my throat, a dry, hollow chuckle that didn't belong to me. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as I set the card down gently on the polished wood of the table. I nodded, the dutiful performer, and reached for a slice of that lemon cake that now tasted like chalk. I even whispered a thank you into the void. Then, I did what I always do. I got up, gathered the sticky plates, and spent the next 20 minutes scrubbing the remnants of my birthday dinner off the china. No one offered to help. No one even looked my way. They were too busy reliving the highlights of their own wit. Later that night, the house was hushed, save for the blue light flicker of Dana's phone. I lay in bed, my eyes locked on a single crack in the ceiling plaster, feeling the weight of the silence. Beside me, Dana was mindlessly scrolling through TikTok, the tinny, frantic audio of 100 different lives bleeding into our bedroom. I cleared my throat, the sound feeling monumental in the dark. "Dana, did you actually think that card was funny?" She didn't even pause her scrolling. "Oh, come on, Caleb, don't be so sensitive. It was a joke." Sensitive. That was the magic word. It was her universal shield, her way of turning my pain into a character flaw. If I raised a concern, I was being sensitive. If I mentioned feeling like a ghost in my own hallways, I was overthinking. If I dared to express a genuine hurt, I was told I was too quiet, too wrapped up in my own head, or simply too much to deal with. But not once in 23 years did she, or any of them, stop to ask why I had become so quiet. They never wondered why the man who used to sing in the shower now moved through the house like a shadow. They never asked why I started spending 4 hours a night tinkering with nothing in the garage, or why I took long, aimless walks in the rain, or why I would sit in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes after work, staring at the steering wheel, just bracing myself to walk through the front door. They didn't ask because they didn't want to know, because if they acknowledged my pain, they'd have to admit they were the ones holding the knife. I waited. I waited until Dana's breathing deepened and the soft glow of her phone finally timed out, leaving the room in total darkness. I crept out of bed, my bare feet silent on the hardwood, and went downstairs. I opened my laptop, the screen's glare stinging my eyes. I didn't hesitate. I searched for one-way flights. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere far. Somewhere with a name that didn't hold any memories of the man I had forced myself to be. I booked it for 30 days out. 30 days was enough time to get my affairs in order. It was enough time to see if anyone would finally notice the shift in the wind, to see if the predictable man disappearing in plain sight would finally trigger an alarm. It was enough time to say 1,000 goodbyes without ever uttering a single word. They didn't notice. In the weeks that followed, I became a ghost in a suit. I began the quiet process of uncoupling my life from theirs. I transferred personal funds into a private account. I spoke to my HR department about transitioning to a remote, freelance basis role for personal reasons. I sold off my old hobby gear on Craigslist and slowly cleaned out my home office, packing my life into nondescript cardboard boxes. They literally stepped over the boxes in the hallway to get to the kitchen. No one asked what was in them. No one asked where they were going. I kept smiling. I kept being the dependable, boring, predictable Caleb. The man they thought they knew. The man they thought they owned. And then the day came. The last straw. It started small, as most things that finally destroy you do. A misplaced comment here, a sharp jab there. The kind of microscopic cruelties that seem like nothing on their own, but eventually pile up until you're suffocating under the weight of them. 2 weeks after the ruining everything card, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It wasn't louder. That would have been a relief. It was emptier. It was the kind of heavy, pressurized silence that hums like static in a dead radio. Dana and I were down to the bare aesthetics of a marriage. Grocery lists, light bill reminders, and coordinating who was taking the car for service. Jake was a permanent stranger, always out with Leia or his friends. Emily remained barricaded behind her bedroom door, her presence signaled only by the muffled bass of her music thumping through the walls like a dying heart. One Tuesday, I walked in from work to find Dana at the kitchen island, a large glass of expensive Chardonnay in her hand, laughing at something on her phone. When she saw me, she didn't brighten. She just offered that sharp, polite, client-facing smile she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, you're home," she said, her tone suggesting she was genuinely surprised I still had a key to the place. "Yeah," I said, hanging my coat on the peg. "Long day." She murmured, already back to her screen. "You always have long days, Caleb. It's kind of your brand." I should have let it go. I should have just walked past. But the 30-day clock was ticking in my head, and I felt a sudden hot spark of defiance. "That's kind of the nature of my job, Dana. Someone has to make sure the bills actually get paid." She looked up then, her eyes narrowing into cold, icy slits. "You always say that. Like I don't work too. Like my clients and my projects don't matter because they aren't as stable as yours." I nodded slowly. "I know you work, Dana. I just meant, I know exactly what you meant," she snapped, her voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze blood. She didn't want a conversation. She wanted a victory. It wasn't a fight in the traditional sense, but it felt like wet paint. Sticky, staining, and impossible to wash off. The very next afternoon, I came home early, my heart heavy with the weight of the flight confirmation in my pocket. Dana's car was already in the driveway. As I stepped into the foyer, a peal of genuine, bright laughter drifted from the living room. It was Dana and Emily, sharing a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. I paused in the hallway, unseen, listening to the two people I had spent my life protecting. I waited for the moment they would mention me, and I knew deep down it wouldn't be with kindness. I felt a momentary spark of genuine warmth, a foolish, flickering hope that perhaps the frost was finally thawing. The sound of their laughter, real, unforced laughter, wafted from the living room, and for a split second, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of a connection. I stepped toward the doorway, my heart hammering a hopeful rhythm against my ribs, ready to finally cross the threshold and join my family. That's when I heard my name, and the air in my lungs turned to ice. "Dad just doesn't get it," Emily was saying, her voice thick with that effortless, cruel amusement she usually reserved for TikTok roasts. It's like he's permanently stuck in simultaneous boredom mode. He's a glitch in the Matrix, but like a really dull one. Dana's laugh rang out, sharp and silvery. "Oh, honey, he's been that way since college. I'm telling you, the man thinks spontaneity is when he decides to order a slightly different turkey sandwich at the deli. It's a personality trait at this point. Or a lack of one." I froze in the shadows of the hallway, half hidden by the heavy velvet curtains, watching them through the cracked door like a voyeur at my own funeral. Emily was sprawled on the sofa, her legs curled up, her mother's sharp features mirrored perfectly in her mocking smirk. Dana held a glass of white wine, the condensation dripping onto her hand, her eyes gleaming with the high of a shared secret. Then Emily dropped it. It was quiet, almost an afterthought, but it hit me with the force of a high-caliber gunshot. "No wonder you used to talk about leaving him." The room went deathly still for half a heartbeat. The atmospheric pressure seemed to drop. Dana didn't laugh this time. She didn't even look shocked. She just tilted her glass, watching the pale liquid swirl, and offered a faint, chilling smile. "That was years ago, Em. Don't repeat that. Some things are better left in the archives." Sauce. Wait until you hear what happens next. But before we get to the most insane part of the story, make sure to subscribe to Reddit Echo and hit the bell icon. You don't want to miss the updates on this one. Let's get back to it. I stood there, a statue carved from grief and cold realization. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't the jagged tremor of rage. It was the vibration of absolute, terrifying clarity. She had said "used to." That was supposed to be the grace note, I guess. The "but I stayed" that makes the betrayal palatable. But all I heard was that for years, my wife had been auditioning for a life that didn't include me, while I was working 50 hours a week to fund the one she was stuck in. That night, I didn't go inside. I turned around, walked out the front door, and got into my car. I drove to a 24-hour grocery store parking lot and sat there for a full hour under the buzzing, flickering orange hum of the streetlights. I just breathed. I just thought. I reached for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, to tell them that I was disappearing, but the realization hit me like a physical weight. Who was left? My parents were long gone. My brother and I had drifted into a silent, bitter estrangement years ago. My coworkers were polite enough, but we shared nothing but spreadsheets and forced small talk over burnt office coffee. My entire universe was contained within the four walls of that colonial house, and that universe had collectively decided I was nothing more than a punchline. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and felt a jolt of genuine horror. I barely recognized the man staring back. There was a thick frost of gray at my temples that I hadn't noticed before. My eyes looked hollowed out, shadowed by a weariness that sleep couldn't touch. This was a face that used to smile easily, a face that used to believe he was loved. Now, it was just a mask of endurance. When I finally crept back home, the house was dark. Dana was passed out on the couch, the TV flickering on mute. Emily had gone out to find some late-night trouble, and Jake was still MIA with his girlfriend. I sat down at the kitchen table, the silence ringing in my ears, and stared at that godforsaken birthday card still pinned to the fridge with a floral magnet. Thanks for ruining everything. The red ink looked like a fresh wound in the dim light. I should have shredded it weeks ago, but now I viewed it differently. It was proof. It was Exhibit A in the trial of my life. It was evidence of exactly what they had become and what I had pathetically allowed them to do to me. The following weekend was Jake's 21st birthday, a milestone, a big deal. Dana went absolutely nuclear with the planning. She hired high-end caterers, strung up expensive Edison bulbs across the patio, and spent hours curating a sentimental slideshow of his baby photos to project onto the living room wall. Everyone was invited. Neighbors, college friends, distant cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. Everyone was invited, it seemed, except for me. Technically, I was there. I moved through the crowd, refilling ice buckets and picking up discarded napkins, but I might as well have been a ghost haunting the festivities. Jake's friends clapped him on the back, shouting and pouring expensive bourbon. Dana flitted through the crowd like a socialite, soaking up the glowing compliments about the vibe she had created. Emily was a whirlwind of motion, documenting every aesthetic second for her Instagram followers, carefully framing me out of every shot. When I finally caught a moment with Jake, he was polite, but his eyes were already searching the room for someone more interesting. "Hey, son," I said, my voice sounding thin and foreign even to me. I handed him a small, heavy box wrapped in simple navy paper. "Happy birthday, big day." He glanced at the box with a flicker of impatience. "Thanks, Dad," he said, the words coming out as a practiced, automatic reflex. He didn't even break his stride. "Oh, hey, Leia's here." He looked right past me, his face lighting up for a girl he'd known for 3 months in a way it hadn't for me in 3 years. He didn't open it. The box sat on the gift table for over an hour, looking small and forgotten among the mountain of high-tech gadgets and designer clothes. Finally, Dana picked it up, her lip curling in a slight smirk. "Oh, Caleb," she sighed, loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. "You really didn't need to get him something so old-fashioned." She opened it anyway. Inside was a heavy, sterling silver watch I'd spent months saving for. I'd had the back engraved in small, elegant script. "Time well spent. Love, Dad." I wanted it to be something he could keep forever. A tangible piece of history he could wear when he eventually became a man of his own. Dana's smirk widened into a full-on laugh. "You do realize he uses a smartwatch for everything, right? This is basically a paperweight." I felt my throat tighten, a hot, prickly sensation spreading behind my eyes. I just nodded. "Yeah, I just thought, never mind." They laughed again, that shared family shorthand of mockery. Jake set the watch aside without a second glance. Emily rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. That was the absolute final moment of impact. I realized then that I wasn't just unloved or unwanted. I was redundant. I was a legacy item in a world that had moved on to a newer, shinier model. After the last guest had stumbled out and the music had finally died, I stayed up to clean. I gathered the sticky empty bottles, the half-eaten catering trays, and the colorful confetti that felt like a mockery of my own gray life. Dana wandered into the kitchen, tipsy and humming some upbeat pop song I didn't recognize. "You could have at least tried to smile more," she said, her voice slurred as she rinsed her wine glass. "You were such a buzzkill tonight." I stopped scrubbing a plate and looked at her. "I did smile, Dana. Barely anyone even noticed I was in the room." "Hardly," she scoffed. "You make people uncomfortable when you get like that. So moody, so serious all the time. Just lighten up, Caleb." It was a celebration. I turned to face her fully, the wet sponge still in my hand. "You humiliate me. You mock my gifts in front of our children and our friends, and I'm supposed to just lighten up and smile through the disrespect?" She froze for a second, her eyes wide, before she let out a sharp, humorless bark of a laugh. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. Nobody's humiliating you. You're just being hypersensitive again. God, you twist every little thing into a tragedy. You're impossible to live with." She shook her head in disgust, muttered something under her breath about me killing the vibe, and walked out of the kitchen. I stood there in the silence of the dirty kitchen, the neon light of the microwave ticking down the seconds of my old life. That night, I didn't even try to go to sleep. I knew exactly what I had to do. I lay there in the oppressive darkness of the master bedroom, my eyes wide open, tracing the familiar shadows on the ceiling. The hallway clock was ticking, each rhythmic thud sounding heavier and more final than the last, like a gavel striking a bench. My one-way flight to the unknown was scheduled for 2 weeks out, a secret lifeline I clung to in the dark. I had originally planned to slip away like a ghost, a quiet note on the pillow, maybe a scheduled email. But the air in this house had become so thick with contempt that staying another 14 days felt physically unbearable. I felt like a diver running out of oxygen, watching the surface get further and further away. Then came the final fracture. It was a Sunday, late morning, the kind of day that used to be sacred. The sun was streaming through the kitchen windows, mocking the gloom in my chest. Jake and Emily were sprawled in the living room, lost in their digital worlds, while Dana sat at her laptop, her fingers clacking away with an aggressive efficiency. I was in the kitchen, the familiar scent of batter hitting a hot griddle filling the air. I was making pancakes. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt at normalcy, a peace offering to a family that wasn't even at war with me. They were just indifferent to my existence. When I called them for breakfast, the silence that followed was deafening. I waited, my spatula midair, and tried again, my voice cracking slightly. Finally, Dana appeared in the doorway, her shoulders hunched and her expression twisted into one of pure irritation. "What is this about, Caleb?" she asked, not even looking at the table. "Breakfast," I said, trying to summon a smile that felt like it was made of lead. "I made pancakes. Your favorite." She let out a long, weary sigh that seemed to drain the warmth from the room. "Caleb, literally no one asked you to do this. We have things to do." That one stung. It shouldn't have. Not after everything else, but it hit a nerve. It was the rejection of a gesture so small and human that it laid bare how little space I occupied in their lives. Jake wandered in a moment later, his eyes never leaving his phone screen. "Hey, Dad, can you Venmo me $50? He asked casually, as if he were asking for a napkin. "Leia and I are going out later, and I'm a bit short." I paused, the heat from the stove rising to my face. "Didn't I just give you money last week, Jake? For the exact same thing?" "Yeah, but that was different," he shot back, his tone instantly defensive. "This is for tonight, don't make it a thing." Before I could even process the entitlement, Dana chimed in from the doorway, her voice sharp. "Just send it, Caleb. My God, it's his birthday week, don't be petty." "It's been over a week since his birthday, Dana," I said quietly, the pancakes beginning to smoke on the griddle. Her voice hardened, turning into that cold, surgical blade she used so well. "You really have to make everything difficult, don't you? You just can't let anyone have a good moment without injecting your misery into it." Emily drifted in then, her hair a bird's nest of tangles, wearing one of Dana's oversized designer sweatshirts. She looked at the table and groaned. "Are we seriously doing pancakes again? You always make way too many and they just sit there and get gross. It's such a waste." I stared at the stack on the table. They were golden, steaming, and perfectly round. I'd even gone to the store specifically for fresh blueberries because Dana used to love them that way back when we were young and broke and happy. "Sorry," I murmured, and I meant it. I was sorry for the pancakes, sorry for the effort, and sorry that I had spent 23 years trying to fill a vessel that was clearly bottomless. Suddenly, Dana's phone buzzed on the counter. She snatched it up, and for a split second, her entire face transformed. A genuine, radiant smile broke through her mask of irritation. "Oh, that's Rick," she said, her thumbs already flying across the screen. "He wants to confirm the design meeting for tomorrow." Rick, her new business partner. She'd mentioned him a few times lately. Actually, she'd mentioned him constantly. He was refreshing, he was ambitious, he was someone who actually gets the vision. She spoke about him with a reverence she used to reserve for our future. Watching her text him back, I saw a spark in her eyes that had been extinguished for me a decade ago. A sharp, ugly instinct twisted in my gut like a rusted wire. "Rick?" I asked, my voice dangerously level. "The one you're meeting at that hotel seminar next week?" She blinked, caught off guard for a fraction of a second, before her face reset into a mask of pure defiance. "What? Oh yeah, it's a client seminar thing. Why? Do you have a problem with my career now too?" "Nothing," I said, but the sheer weight of my exhaustion must have been written in my eyes. "Don't start, Caleb," she hissed, stepping closer. "You are not going to ruin this for me too. I finally have something that feels exciting, and you're just standing there like a dark cloud." The kitchen went silent. Jake shifted uncomfortably, and even Emily looked up from her phone, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What does that mean, Dana? Ruin this for you, too?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It means you always find a way to drag everything down," she shouted, her frustrations finally boiling over. "Every opportunity, every happy moment, you just—" She stopped, exhaling a jagged breath of pure disgust. "You're exhausting, Caleb. You're just, exhausting to be around." Something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a clean, silent parting of the soul. "I'm exhausting?" I said, my voice steadier and colder than I ever thought possible. "I work 50 hours a week at a job I hate to keep this house standing. I fix every leak. I pay every bill. I show up for every single thing you need when no one else bothers. And you call that exhausting?" Dana crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with a cruel light. "There you go again, playing the martyr. You think doing the bare minimum, paying bills and existing, makes you some kind of hero? That's your job, Caleb. That's what you signed up for when we got married. You don't get a trophy for being a provider." Jake muttered under his breath, "Mom, just drop it." But she wasn't finished. "No, he needs to hear it. You act like this family owes you some grand debt of gratitude. Like we're all supposed to bow down because you—" "What? Keep the lights on?" "It's pathetic." I looked at her. Then I looked at Emily's blank, bored expression and Jake's awkward silence. In that moment, the last of the wool was pulled from my eyes. They didn't just stop loving me. They didn't just find me boring. They actively resented me for the stability I provided because it reminded them that they were dependent on a man they despised. That was the moment the world shifted. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the pancakes. I just stopped. I stopped trying to explain. I stopped hoping they would see the man behind the bank account. Later that night, while they were all huddled together in the living room watching a movie, laughing and sharing popcorn as if I didn't exist, I went upstairs. I opened my laptop and moved my flight up. 3 days. In 72 hours, I would be a memory. But the universe wasn't finished twisting the knife. The very next morning, a fluke of technology, a synced iPad left open on the kitchen island, revealed a series of messages between Dana and Rick. It made everything nauseatingly clear. I didn't even have to go looking for proof. It practically screamed at me from the screen. That's the part people never tell you about betrayal. It's not the discovery that hurts the most. It's the realization that while you were drowning, the person who promised to save you was the one holding your head under the water. The confirmation of your worst fear isn't a sudden explosion. It's the sound of the final puzzle piece clicking into place, completing a picture you never wanted to see. Admitting the truth means acknowledging that your entire world, the last 23 years of your life, was a meticulously constructed lie. It happened on a Tuesday morning, draped in the mundane atmosphere of brewing coffee and chirping birds. Dana had left her phone charging on the marble kitchen island while she hopped into the shower. In over 2 decades of marriage, I had never once snooped. I believed in the sanctity of privacy, or perhaps I was just too terrified of what I might find. But that morning, the screen flickered to life. The name Rick illuminated the darkened glass. The preview line was a serrated blade. "Last night was amazing. You look stunning. Same time next week?" For a long, agonizing minute, the world stopped spinning. My heartbeat was a deafening roar in my ears, drowning out the sound of the running water upstairs. I stared at my fingers as they hovered over the device. They felt like foreign objects, trembling with a cold, kinetic energy. I didn't open the thread. I didn't need to see the photos or the heart emojis. The map of my betrayal was already drawn in high definition. When she finally came downstairs, wrapped in her plush white robe and humming a light, airy tune, I just watched her. I looked at her and saw a stranger wearing the skin of the woman I loved. This was the same woman who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during old black and white movies. The woman who had wept with genuine joy when I proposed with a cheap secondhand ring because we were flat broke and full of dreams. Now, she was just a woman who smiled at a glowing screen as if I were a piece of furniture she had grown tired of looking at. "Morning," she said, her voice light and careless. Morning, I replied. My voice was steady, unnervingly calm. It was the voice of a man who had already left the room. She poured her coffee, the steam rising between us like a shroud. You're quiet again, Caleb. Everything okay? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my own black coffee. Yeah, everything is fine. That was the last real conversation we ever had. The next 72 hours were a blurred, feverish dream. I moved through the house like a ghost haunting my own life. I went to work, closed out my projects, and packed a single suitcase with the bare essentials. I scheduled a cab for 4:30 a.m. on Friday. I looked at that cruel birthday card still pinned to the fridge. Thanks for ruining everything. And left it there. It was their North Star now. Let it guide them. On my final night, I stood in the doorways of my children's rooms. Jake was passed out, his heavy gaming headphones still clamped over his ears, dead to the world. Emily was bathed in the toxic blue light of her phone, her thumb mindlessly flicking through a sea of strangers' lives. I felt a surge of words rise in my throat. An apology, a goodbye, a warning, but they died before they could reach the air. They wouldn't understand. To them, I wasn't a man. I was a utility. And you don't miss a utility until the power goes out. Friday arrived in a coat-haute of pre-dawn gray. I rolled my suitcase down the driveway, the wheels clicking softly against the pavement like a countdown. No dramatic note on the vanity. No screaming match, just a clean, surgical silence. By the time Dana woke up to an empty bed and a cold house, I was 30,000 feet in the air, watching the sunrise hit the wing of a plane bound for Portland. For the first few days in Oregon, I felt nothing. No rush of freedom, no crushing weight of guilt, just a vast, echoing numbness. I stayed in a budget Airbnb on the outskirts, a tiny studio with creaky floorboards and a temperamental coffee maker that hissed and sputtered like it was gasping for air. I would spend hours staring at the water stains on the ceiling, wondering, what now? Pop culture tells you that leaving your life is cinematic, a montage of reinvention set to an upbeat soundtrack. In reality, it feels like drifting in the middle of a dark ocean. You're not drowning, but you can't see the shore either. During the first week, my phone became a war zone. Dana called dozens of times. I watched the screen glow, then go dark. Then the texts started. At first, they were confused. Where are you, Caleb? This isn't funny, can we talk? Then they turned into a familiar, acidic anger. You're being incredibly selfish. Grow up. You can't just walk out on your family. We have a life here. I read every single one. I replied to none. Eventually, the digital screaming stopped. Silence returned. I spent my days existing in the margins. I went on long, solitary walks along the Willamette River, ate at greasy diners where the waitresses called me honey, and didn't know a single thing about my spreadsheets or my predictability. I didn't even tell my firm where I was. I just logged in from my laptop, told them I was dealing with significant personal adjustments, and kept the wheels turning. But isolation is a mirror you can't turn away from. Without the constant white noise of Dana's sarcasm or the kids' biting indifference, my own voice, the one I had buried under 23 years of duty, began to whisper again. The version of Caleb who loved old blues records. The Caleb who used to sketch elaborate designs for furniture he never had the confidence to build. One morning, I bought a cheap spiral-bound notebook and started writing lists of micro goals. Go 24 hours without checking the family group chat. Cook a meal I've never tried before. Start a conversation with a total stranger. Take one photo of something beautiful, even if it's just moss on a brick. It felt ridiculous, almost infantile, but it worked. I was relearning how to be a person instead of a provider. The true shift happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was wandering downtown when I caught the scent of something intoxicating, a mixture of raw oak, pungent varnish, and fresh sawdust. I followed the smell to a tiny, cramped woodworking shop wedged between a bookstore and a vegan cafe. An older man with hands like gnarled roots named Tom looked up from a lathe. He didn't ask for my life story or my credit score. He just saw the way I was looking at the wood. Need some help, friend? I've always wanted to learn this. I said, my voice sounding stronger than it had in months. But I never had the time. Tom grinned, revealing a gap in his teeth, and gestured to a pile of scrap cedar. Well, you're vertical in breathing, aren't you? Then start now. And just like that, I did. I started spending my weekends there. Tom taught me the language of the grain. He showed me how to plane an edge until it was smooth as silk and how to join two pieces of wood so perfectly they became one. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just fixing things that were broken. I was creating something new. I was clumsy at first, my hands stiff and unaccustomed to anything that wasn't a keyboard or a steering wheel. But I was patient. Oh, I had decades of practice in being patient. There was a primal meditative rhythm to the work. The rasp of the plane, the rhythmic shh of the sandpaper, the sweet earthy scent of fresh cedar shavings curling onto the floor. It felt healing in a way no therapist could ever match. It was tangible. It was honest. Unlike my marriage, the wood didn't lie to me. If I treated it with respect, it yielded. If I was careless, it left a mark. Weeks bled into months, and the numbness in my chest began to crack, letting in the first rays of actual life. I moved out of the Airbnb and into a drafty but charming little apartment tucked above a local bakery. Every morning at 5 a.m., I woke not to the sound of Dana's sharp voice or the kids slamming doors, but to the intoxicating aroma of proofing dough and fresh sourdough hitting the oven. My hair continued to gray, the silver spreading like a map of the miles I'd traveled. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who was lighter, healthier, a man whose eyes had stopped looking like hollowed-out caves. My company finally realized I wasn't coming back to the office and offered me a fully remote senior project role. The salary was more than enough for my new, simpler life, and the flexible hours became a gift. I spent my mornings on spreadsheets and my afternoons in the shop with Tom, covered in sawdust and sweat. Then came the day that changed everything. Tom approached me, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag, and handed me an order form from a high-end restaurant downtown. "They want 6 custom-carved oak dining tables, Caleb," he said, his eyes twinkling under bushy brows. "I'm getting too old to pull those 14-hour days alone. You up for a partnership?" I hesitated, the old ghost of Mr. Predictable whispering that I wasn't talented enough. But Tom just smiled and gripped my shoulder. "You've got the touch, kid. Don't sell yourself short just because you spent 20 years in a cubicle. You're a maker." We poured our souls into those tables. We worked until our backs ached and our fingers were stained with walnut oil. When we delivered them, they were as smooth as glass, the grain of the oak singing under the finish. The restaurant owner was floored. Word of mouth is a powerful thing in a city like Portland. Suddenly, the commissions started flooding in. A boutique needed shelving, a coffee shop wanted a live edge counter, and a woman commissioned a delicate reading desk made from reclaimed barnwood. For the first time in decades, I wasn't boring Caleb or the martyr dad. I was just Caleb, the woodworker. One evening, I sat by the river watching the orange sun dip behind the steel skeleton of the bridge. I thought about the colonial house 3,000 miles away. Did they miss me? Or did they just miss the money? Did they even speak my name? Or had I been scrubbed from the family history like a bad stain? I felt the urge to stalk their Instagrams, to see if Dana was still with Rick or if Jake had finally gotten his act together. But I resisted. That part of my life felt like a movie I had starred in a lifetime ago, a film so painful I couldn't bear to watch the reruns. Then the first crack in the dam appeared. An email hit my inbox. Subject: Dad. My heart hammered against my ribs. I almost deleted it. I almost chose the safety of the void. But curiosity is a persistent ghost. It was from Jake, and it was only 3 lines long. "Hey, Dad. Mom said you're okay. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things went down. Emily's been well. She's mad you left, but I get it now. Hope you're doing all right." I stared at those words until they blurred. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to bridge that chasm yet. The wounds were still too raw, the skin over them too thin. But that message stayed with me, a tiny pinprick of light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel, life kept moving. I started running in the mornings, feeling the cold Oregon air burn my lungs in the best way. I made friends. Real friends. There was Tom, of course. Laura, the woman from the bakery who always saved me a cinnamon roll, and a group of cranky retirees who taught me the nuances of park bench chess. They didn't know about the birthday card or the Mr. Predictable jokes. They just knew me as the quiet guy who made beautiful things with his hands. That was enough. It was more than enough. Then, the messages from Dana started piercing the silence. Jake dropped out of school. He's depressed, Caleb. Please call me. I didn't call. I felt the worry, yes, the phantom limb of fatherhood. But I knew that if I stepped back into that storm, I'd be sucked back into the role of the fixer, the man who absorbs the blows so they don't have to. A week later, Emily's not speaking to me. She blames me for you leaving. She says I pushed you out. Please, Caleb, just talk to them. This house is falling apart. I remained silent. It wasn't out of cruelty or a desire for revenge. It was out of necessity. For the first time, they were being forced to live in the same cold, suffocating silence they had forced on me for 23 years. They were finally meeting the man they had created. Another month passed. Riverside Woodworks, the company Tom and I officially registered, was thriving. The day the hand-painted wooden sign went up over the shop door, I felt a swell of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. It was the first thing in my life that belonged solely to me. Then came the final blow. A Thursday morning. I was sanding a set of bar stools when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. I had unfollowed Jake months ago, but we were still friends. The preview text on the notification stopped my heart. Dad, please come back. We were wrong. I dropped the sandpaper. My hands were shaking as I opened the post. It was a long, raw, public confession. Jake had poured his heart out to the void, hoping it would reach me. He talked about how I had been the invisible pillar holding up their world. He admitted he never realized what it meant to have a father who worked himself to the bone until the house went cold and the bills went unpaid, and the laughter turned into bitter arguments. He said the house felt like a tomb. He said Dana wasn't herself, that the spark she thought she found had turned out to be a flickering candle in a hurricane. The last line shattered the last of my resolve. I don't know if you'll ever read this, Dad, but if you do, I'm sorry. We all are. We didn't know what we had until we broke it. I sat there on my workbench, staring at the screen through a sudden, hot rush of tears. 23 years of being the predictable man, and it took my total disappearance for them to finally see me. Tom walked over, noticing my slumped shoulders and the way I was gasping for air. Caleb, you okay, partner? I looked up at him, my face wet, the smell of sawdust and fresh bread surrounding me. I looked at the sign for Riverside Woodworks and then back at the message from the son I still loved, despite the scars he'd left. I don't know, Tom, I whispered. I think the silence finally worked. I wiped my face with a rough, calloused hand and forced a tight smile at Tom. Yeah, I muttered, my voice thick. Just some sawdust in my eyes. This oak is a killer. That night, the river called to me again. I walked along the bank, watching the city lights fracture and dance on the dark, moving surface of the Willamette. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain and wet pavement. And for the first time since I'd stepped off that plane, I didn't feel the jagged edges of anger or the hollow ache of sadness. I didn't even feel that petty sense of vindication I thought I'd crave. I just felt peace. But peace is a tricky thing. It doesn't just settle the soul, it stirs up new, uncomfortable questions. I realized then that rebuilding a life isn't just about the architecture of starting over. The new job, the new hobby, the new city. It's about the soul-searching decision of what, and more importantly, who, is worth bringing back into the frame. As fate would have it, that decision didn't wait for me to find an answer. It came crashing into my reality much sooner than I ever anticipated. The next morning, the rhythm of my workshop was broken by a frantic, uneven knock on the heavy wooden door. When I pulled it open, the world seemed to tilt. Standing there, framed by the gray morning mist, was Emily. She looked like a ghost of the girl I'd left behind. She hadn't slept in what looked like days. Her sharp porcelain features, the ones she used to weaponize with a smirk, were drawn and haggard. Her eyeliner was smudged into dark bruises under her eyes, and those clever, biting eyes she'd inherited from Dana were bloodshot and swollen. She was swallowed whole by an oversized, faded hoodie, one I remembered her wearing when she was 14, the sleeves now inches too short for her lanky arms. The confident, lethal teenager who used to call me a human calendar and roll her eyes at my very existence was gone. This girl looked small. She looked breakable. She didn't say a word at first. She just stood in the doorway, her knuckles white as she gripped the strap of her backpack like a literal anchor keeping her from drifting away. Behind her, a light Oregon drizzle made a soft, percussive ticking sound against the metal canopy. I stood there, frozen, still clutching a piece of sandpaper in a corner of a heavy oak slab. I was covered in a fine layer of sawdust, my hands stained with dark walnut polish, looking every bit the man who had traded a tie for a chisel. "Hi," she finally croaked, her voice cracking like an old, neglected radio. I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. I just searched her face for the girl I knew. She glanced nervously over her shoulder at the street, then down at the growing puddles around her sneakers. Can I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She walked in with hesitant, slow steps, her eyes darting around the shop. She breathed in the heavy scent of wood oil, varnish, and aged timber. She watched the flickering overhead fluorescent light and looked at the half-finished projects lined up against the brick wall with a strange kind of reverence. She reached out, her fingertips grazing the edge of a hand-carved chair, and she nodded to herself as if she were finally seeing the man I had become. "This is cool," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the shop. You really made all this stuff yourself?" "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding deeper, grounded by the weight of the wood around me. "I did." Emily sank onto a tall wooden stool near my workbench, letting her bag thud onto the floor. She sat there for a long time, her head bowed, her fingers compulsively picking at the fraying threads of her hoodie sleeves. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. "I didn't think you'd actually be here," she whispered, not looking up. "Jake said maybe you'd totally moved on, that you probably started a whole new family or something, that you were done with us." "I didn't start a new family," I said firmly, leaning against the workbench. "I'm just living, Emily." She let out a short, jagged laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Well, that's more than I can say for any of us back home." That line cut through me like a fresh saw blade. I watched as she rubbed her temples, her shoulders shaking. "Mom doesn't talk to me anymore," she said, the words spilling out now. "Not for real. She just sits in the dark with her wine, scrolling through her phone and pretending everything is fine. The house it's a wreck, Dad. She hired a cleaner, but the woman quit after 2 weeks because Mom was so impossible to deal with." She shook her head, a tear finally escaping. "It's so weird. Everything is completely broken, but no one will say it out loud. It's like we're all just standing around on a stage, waiting for someone to reset the scene. Like we're stuck in a bad play and the director just walked out." I stayed silent. I didn't offer a platitude. I just let her voice fill the space. Suddenly, she snapped her head up, her eyes burning with a raw, agonizing question. "Why didn't you say goodbye, Dad? Why did you just vanish?" The question burned. I sat down on a crate across from her, my hands clasped tightly together, sawdust falling from my skin. "Because I knew if I tried to explain it to you, you wouldn't have listened. Not then. You, your brother, your mother, you all made it very clear exactly what I meant to that house. I was the bill payer. I was the punchline. I was the predictable guy who existed to make your lives comfortable. I didn't leave because I hated you, Emily. I left because I was disappearing, and not one of you even noticed I was fading away." She bit her lip so hard I thought she'd draw blood. "I noticed," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. You noticed when I was gone. You didn't notice when I was fading. There's a big difference." That hit home. I watched the realization wash over her, the way her bravado finally collapsed into dust. A tear tracked through the smudge of her eyeliner, but she didn't try to hide it this time. "I'm sorry," she choked out. I nodded slowly, feeling a lump form in my own throat. "I believe you." For a while, we just sat there while the rain intensified outside, drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. It was the first time we had been in the same room without a joke or a jab between us. Then she looked at me, her expression turning dark and weary. "Mom's still seeing Rick," she said. I didn't flinch. I didn't even feel a spark of jealousy, just a dull, distant pity. She claims they're collaborating on a project, but I found the texts on her iPad. It's gross, Dad. He calls her baby and sends all these thirsty emojis. She actually made me lie to Jake about it. She said he wouldn't understand the nuance of their partnership. "Does Jake know now?" I asked. She nodded, a grim look on her face. "Yeah, he found out a week ago. He caught them on a business call that was definitely not about interior design. That's why he dropped out. He's just done. He's staying at a friend's place now, and he won't even answer her texts." The wreckage of the life I'd left behind was laid out on my workshop floor, and for the first time, I had to decide if I was going to pick up the tools to fix it or let the fire burn itself out. "That's why he made that post on Facebook," Emily continued, her voice rising in a jagged crescendo of frustration. "Mom blamed you for him dropping out. She stood in the kitchen screaming that you abandoned your responsibilities, that you were the reason Jake lost his focus and failed his midterms. She told everyone who would listen that your midlife crisis was destroying his future. But it's not true, Dad. It's her. She's the one falling apart. She's the one who turned the house into a war zone." I let the weight of those words sink in, feeling the familiar dull ache of being the family's designated scapegoat one last time. I didn't want to feel a single ounce of pity for Dana. Not after the R.I.P. spontaneity tombstone. Not after Rick. But hearing the desperation in Emily's voice made something shift. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical observation. "She's mad at herself," I said, my voice barely a whisper against the hum of the workshop's heater. "She made choices she can't undo, and now she's taking the fallout out on everyone else because she doesn't know how to carry the weight of her own guilt." Emily gave a bitter, hollow smile. "Classic Dana. Always someone else's fault." I looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing the sawdust-covered girl on my stool. "Why did you really come all this way, Emily? Why now?" She blinked, her eyes glistening. "To see you. To say I'm sorry for being a brat and a bully, and to ask you for help." She hesitated, her breath hitching, then reached into her bag and pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper. I recognized the formatting immediately. Having spent decades in project management, I knew a legal template when I saw one. "She's filing for divorce," Emily said, her voice trembling. "But she's not just leaving. She's going after everything, Dad. Your pension, the 401k, the savings. She's been on the phone with a lawyer for hours every night saying you owe her for abandoning the family and for the emotional distress of your disappearance. She wants to bleed you dry." I raised an eyebrow, a spark of the old, calculated Caleb returning. "She told you all of this?" "Not on purpose." Emily let out a sharp, dry laugh. "She thinks I'm still her little shadow, but I was listening through the vents. I heard every word. She told the lawyer you were hiding offshore accounts, that you'd manipulated her for years, and that she was the one who built our life while you just coasted on her creativity." My jaw clenched so hard it ached. Coasted? I was the one who stayed up until dawn doing the accounting for her business while she slept. I was the one who missed my own hobbies to fix the plumbing she ignored. "I know it's not true," Emily added quickly, reaching out as if to touch my hand, but pulling back at the last second. "Jake knows it too. We've been talking. Really talking. Without her in the room, everything looks different, clearer. We realized the predictable guy was actually the only thing keeping the roof over our heads." "And why are you showing me this now?" I asked, gesturing to the papers. She reached back into her bag and pulled out a second envelope, unsealed. Inside wasn't paper, but a small silver USB drive. "I took her files," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "I got into her laptop while she was out with Rick. I took everything: emails, screenshots of their messages, bank transfers she made to his consulting firm, voice recordings of her talking about how she was going to take you for every cent, because you were too weak to fight back." My mind began to spin, the gears of a man who spent 20 years managing complex systems suddenly clicking into place. "Why, Emily? Why betray her for me?" She looked up at me, her gaze raw and hauntingly honest. "Because she doesn't deserve to destroy you after everything she already did." I thought I hated you, Dad. I really did, but I didn't understand what I was hating. I was just pairing her. I was a kid and I saw you as a wall, a background object, not a person. But then you left. The wall was gone and the whole house just started to collapse. I started seeing the cracks. I started seeing how she talks about people, even us, when we aren't around. The way she spins reality until you feel crazy. Her hands were shaking now, and she tucked them into her sleeves. I got angry at first, then I got scared. And then I started remembering things, like how you'd sit in the car with me for an hour after I blew a goal at soccer practice while I just cried. How you stayed up all night helping me with that chemistry project. How you always knew exactly when to bring me peppermint tea when I had a cold without me even asking. You were quiet, Dad, but you were there. You were always there. My throat tightened, a lump of unspoken grief and sudden overwhelming love forming in my chest. "I can't fix what we did to you," she whispered, a tear finally falling. "But maybe I can stop her from making it worse." That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. I took the USB drive from her, my hands steady and cold. "Does she know you have this?" "No, she thinks she misplaced her backup drive." "Good." I leaned back on my stool, taking a deep, grounding breath. The sawdust in the air didn't bother me anymore. "What are you going to do with it?" Emily asked, part guilt and part relief washing over her face. "I'm going to take back what's mine," I said. The next few days were a blur of calculated motion. I called my lawyer, Derek, an old friend from my manufacturing days who knew exactly how much of my soul I'd poured into that house. I didn't give him a long-winded story. I just said, "I need discretion, I need speed, and I need a shark." I forwarded the files. He called me back an hour later, his voice crackling with professional glee. "Caleb, this isn't just evidence, it's a total massacre. This is pure gold. The fraud alone, transferring marital assets to this Rick guy under the guise of business expenses, would kill her case in 5 minutes. But the infidelity, the documented manipulation, the recordings of her planning to commit perjury? You could turn this into a massive counterclaim. You could take the house, the business, everything." "I don't want to ruin her, Derek," I said, looking out the window at the peaceful Oregon rain. "I just want her to stop trying to ruin me. I want my life back." He laughed. "Then this is your leverage. We'll draft the reply. If she tries to step one foot into a courtroom, we bury her in receipts. She won't have a leg to stand on." For the first time since that birthday dinner, I felt a sensation I thought I'd lost forever. Control. Emily stayed in Portland for a week, sleeping in the spare room above the bakery. We spent every night talking, not just about the divorce, but about the years of silence. We talked about the guilt she carried and the impossible expectations Dana had placed on her to be a mini-me, sharp, clever, and cold. I didn't even know who I was without her voice in my head telling me who to be, Emily admitted one night over coffee. I looked at my daughter, seeing the person emerging from the shadow of the woman who tried to erase me. "Now you do," I said, "and she's a lot better than the version she wanted you to be." On Thursday, the sentence was finally broken by a different kind of sound. The vibration of my phone and a name on the screen I hadn't seen in months. "Jake." I answered with a simple, grounded, "Hello?" "Dad." His voice cracked on the very first syllable, a raw, jagged sound that carried the weight of everything he hadn't said for years. He sounded small, stripped of the bravado and the borrowed arrogance he'd worn like a second skin. He asked if we could meet. He said he wanted to talk, to apologize, to tell me that he actually missed me. I told him we would meet next week. I wasn't being cruel, and I wasn't avoiding him. I just needed time to finish the foundation of my new reality. I needed space to ensure that when I stepped back into their lives, I was doing so as a man they could never break again. I had learned a terrifyingly beautiful lesson during my months in Portland. Silence is power. When you use it right, it becomes a fortress. You wait, you build, you prepare in the shadows, and then, when the moment is exactly right, you strike with the precision of a master craftsman. Dana had no idea what was coming. She was still operating under the delusion that I was the same old Caleb, the predictable man who would eventually fold under pressure and hand over his life's work just to keep the peace. But the next document Derek filed didn't just block her desperate grab for my pension. It hit her with a devastating cease and desist for the defamatory lies she'd been spreading. And the next phone call she received wasn't from her lawyer. It was from the biggest client her design firm ever had. Among the digital ghosts Emily had recovered from the laptop was a forwarded invoice. It was a masterpiece of corporate greed. Dana had doctored the numbers to overcharge a high-profile client by 40%, funneling the bonus cash into a secret account to fund a lavish weekend getaway at a 5-star resort with Rick. With one single email, one careful whisper into the right ears, the woman who once laughed at a birthday card that said, "Thanks for ruining everything," was about to find out what it truly felt like to lose everything. By the time the first domino fell, I was already 5 moves ahead, watching the board from a distance. It started with Everett Linden, the founder of Linden & Company, a luxury developer who didn't just have money. IL had a reputation for being a shark who devoured anyone who tried to play him for a fool. Dana had spent months gloating about hooking the whale, but I knew Everett's type. He was a man of cold, hard facts. I sent the email anonymously. No vitriol, no bitter commentary, no accusations, just a forwarded thread between Dana and Rick, the doctored invoice attached like a smoking gun, and one specific line from Rick that read, "If they're rich enough to build a pool that lights up when you clap, they're rich enough to cover our weekend." It took less than 24 hours for the explosion. I didn't need to hear from Everett directly. I saw the aftermath when Emily sent me a photo the next afternoon. It was a candid shot of Dana standing on the sidewalk outside her office, clutching a soggy cardboard box filled with her belongings. Her face a horrific mask of rage and total disbelief. Linden hadn't just fired her. He'd blacklisted her. By the end of the week, 3 more major clients had jumped ship. Then came the legal hammer. Derek filed our official counterclaim. We weren't just defending my pension. We were suing for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and malicious interference with financial assets. It wasn't about the money. I had enough. It was about the record. I wanted a permanent legal documentation of the truth that would follow her like a shadow every time she tried to rewrite our history to make me the villain. When the paperwork hit her doorstep, she lost what was left of her mind. Jake called me 2 hours after the courier left, his voice panicked and shaky. "She's freaking out, Dad. She's screaming, throwing things, blaming Emily for everything. She says you brainwashed us, that you turned her own children against her." "I didn't turn anyone, Jake," I said, my voice as calm as the river. "I just left. People chose their sides based on who stayed." We met a week later in a small, quiet park on the edge of Portland, where the cherry blossoms were just starting to bloom. Jake showed up in a hoodie and jeans, looking years older than 20. He was heavier, his eyes were tired, and the cocky smirk was gone. In its place was a kind of humility I'd never seen in him. He didn't just apologize for the card, he apologized for every time he'd laughed at me behind my back, for every time he'd sided with Dana's cruelty just to stay on her good side, and for every moment he chose to see me as a paycheck rather than a person. "I thought being loud and sharp made you strong," he said, staring at his shoes, "but I get it now. You were the strongest one in the house, Dad. You just never felt the need to yell about it." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the tears had dried up months ago. Instead, I forgave him. Not because he had earned it in a single afternoon, but because I needed to put down the heavy burden of their betrayal. Jake even offered to testify for me in court, to stand up and tell the world exactly what had happened in that colonial house. But the court date never came. Once Dana's lawyer saw the mountain of evidence Emily and I had gathered, the fraud, the infidelity, the documented malice, he advised her to settle privately and quickly. She withdrew her claim on my pension. She signed a formal statement admitting to misrepresentation and false accusations. I didn't squeeze her for every cent. I didn't need to. The revenge wasn't about her bank account. It was about showing her what happens when you push a patient man so far into the shadows that he becomes invisible. Because when you stop seeing someone, you forget they are still watching, still learning. Silence is the deadliest weapon because you never see it coming. Emily moved in with me shortly after. She needed a fresh start, away from the toxic fumes of our old life. Dana, stripped of her pride and her thriving business, had begun to spiral, drinking, lashing out, and calling her children traitors. She sent me one final email. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed this family." I didn't reply. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped being the glue that held their dysfunction together, and they weren't strong enough to stand on their own. Months turned into a year. Things changed. Emily started therapy and is finding her own voice. Jake got a steady job, moved into his own place, and started night classes for counseling. He wants to help kids from messed up families find their way out. I kept building. Riverside Woodworks expanded, and now Tom and I specialize in custom kitchens. I have 2 apprentices now, and my face appears in local ads with the tagline, "Handcrafted by Caleb." Nobody calls me boring anymore. One afternoon, I got a message request from Rick. It was short. "You're a scary guy, Caleb. Respect." I deleted it without a second thought. I wasn't scary. I wasn't vindictive. I was just a man who had finally decided his worth wasn't up for debate. The last time I saw Dana was a total accident at a local grocery store. She looked thinner, her face drawn and tired, her cart filled with frozen dinners and cheap wine. When our eyes met, she froze, her mouth opening as if to speak. I didn't scowl, I didn't gloat. I just nodded politely, as I would to a stranger, and walked right past her. She wasn't the villain of my entire life. She was just the wrong person for the man I was becoming. I'm not Mr. Predictable anymore. I'm Caleb, builder, father, and a man who is finally free. On my last birthday, there were no insults. Emily baked the cake from scratch. Jake brought the candles. There were no cards with hidden jabs, no performative laughter for social media. Just a quiet dinner with the people who truly saw me. As we cleared the plates, Emily looked at me and said, "Thanks for not giving up on yourself, Dad." I smiled, looked around at my life, and felt something solid, earned, and real. Peace. Because the truth is, I never really wanted revenge. I just wanted them to feel exactly what happened when I finally stopped smiling and walked away into the light. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for my channel. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.